Good day, everyone, and welcome to the Medium's Porch. I am your host, Kathleen Boldt. The Medium's Porch is here to bring through the process, privilege, and power of spirit communication. And we do this by inviting guests from all over the globe to come in and share with you their insights and their wisdom. Today's guest is coming to us from Pennsylvania, USA, which is very close to LILYDALE. So we have met each other in LILYDALE. And for those of you that haven't been to LILYDALE, I want to share with you, this is a wonderful opportunity for you to learn more about the people that congregate in LILYDALE, teach at LILYDALE, and share their insights and wisdom at LILYDALE as well as online. And if you're interested in learning more about LILYDALE and what LILYDALE is, please go to their website, www.lilydalerassembly.org, or follow us, which is even better if you want to learn more about all the different podcasts that are being presented. You can follow us at LILYDALE New York. That would be www.facebook.com/LILYDALE New York. And that's where you'll find us appearing. I also air these programs on Spiritual Medium Kathleen at YouTube, as well as on my website, as well as on the Facebook page. But all of that is listed below, and you can check that out. So without further ado, I want to move forward and introduce you to our guest, who is patiently sitting in the window beside me here as you're watching us. And this is Jenn Shepherd. Hi, Jenn.
Kathleen.
Jenn holds a BA in history from Penn State, Maryland, with a focus on religious studies. And she completed ministry studies and secondary teacher certification at Mercyhurst College. She was a teacher of 7th and 8th graders for over a decade and is now the spiritual leader at the Unity Church in Edinburgh. She's a recognized platform and private session medium. Jenn is an ordained spiritualist minister, and you will find her teaching her courses through LILYDALE this February. In fact, I want to ask you guys all that are watching here to get your pens out, because she is teaching very close to the date that we're airing this podcast. So please write down the dates if you're interested in learning more about your spirituality and your mediumship. Jenn is teaching a class called Mediumship as Spiritual Practice. It comes in 3 parts. It gives you a good month to practice and to work on the information and be inspired by the information she shares with you. And those dates are February 3rd, March 3rd, and April 7th. Each one of those dates are the first Monday of the month. And Jenn, the title of it is Mediumship as Spiritual Practice. And Jenn is well adept at working through and understanding from a personal perspective what that means to practice mediumship and to continually develop spirituality. So I highly recommend these classes. Please write them down, check them out. You can purchase them on lilydalerassembly.org, and the tickets are there. Sign up for that. It's virtual. You can come in pajamas. So keep that in mind. All right, super. So we're here with Jenn, and if you want to catch Jenn, in the summertime, in the past, she's been in LILYDALE teaching, but this year she has a special opportunity to be the minister in residence of Unity at Chautauqua. And this is the Chautauqua Institute in New York State. And she'll be there in the 9th week doing the meditations, setting up programs, another way to spend your summer and have a great time, learning from someone who is connected with LILYDALE and will be popping into LILYDALE as well. She might see her around town, so I'm sure she'll accept you to say hi when you do see her. All right. Beautiful. So there's so much to say about Jenn. Jenn, you're sitting there so patiently.
I know I told you before we got on, but it's always interesting to hear yourself be talked about. It's
Exactly. I'm going to skip this. We're going to jump to Bolts of Love later. She has an organization that she started, that co-founded with others, called Bolts of Love. And so we'll talk about that in a bit. Let's get started directly with Jenn. Let's hear from Jenn. Jenn, welcome again. And one of the places I want to start with you, obviously, is tell us about yourself. Tell us why you get called back to mediumship, why mediumship has become so important to you.
a big question, isn't it?
It is a big question, but it leaves you open to talk about it as you will.
Yeah, and for me, it's been a journey of self-discovery. I know a lot of us start off with that we want to help people, we want to talk to the people that have passed, we want to connect and know that there's an afterlife, all of those things. And yet, I found that is the most tiniest part of the mediumship. that really it's the connection with me and what's happening internally with my own healing and growth, what I'm allowing, what I'm not allowing, and that connection to all that is that brings about when I do those communications with other people, it brings it out more. And then my everyday life, I'm more aware. I'm aware of my connection. I'm aware of when I do need to check in with myself and say it's time for some kind of alignment or healing. And it's a continual growth process. So, I keep, if we use the keep coming back to mediumship, it's because it's really the anchor for me to be who I can be, and where my natural talents and abilities from spirit spring from. Or, and I actually want to switch that. It's not from spirit, it's within spirit, because I don't know that spirit's separate anymore. I know when I first started using the terminology of mediumship, it was, oh, spirit's over there and I'm here and I need to connect somehow and I need to bring forth evidence. And yes, all of that, the evidence and everything is still true. And yet spirit isn't over there. Spirit is a shift of awareness only. Because we're human, we just shift awareness to understand that it's always there and that we are there in spirit. We are the spirit. So it's that journey for me. It's the continual alignment into who I really am as an aspect of spirit.
Right. Because we are spirit ourselves, as you said, an aspect of spirit.
Spirit.
Yeah,
Mhm.
maybe talk a little more about that for people that have never encountered this before. How are we an aspect of spirit? How do you see that?
Well, if we take the idea or the recognition of oneness, right? If there is a oneness, and that oneness is so huge that it encompasses the entire universe, not to mention the 7 billion humans just on this planet, right?
Right. That's a lot
All
of
of the
oneness.
other extra. So if we just take the humans for a moment, right? And we have 7 billion viewpoints, perspective. It's like, I don't know, maybe a good metaphor would be spirit having the eyes, the ears, the hands, the feet, 7 billion different ways. So like we have 2 eyes and we see, our peripheral vision here. We have our ears that we interpret. We have our experiences, and all of that gets shifted together so that we can understand, um, who we are in that mix of oneness, and how we are actually that part of the perception for oneness, right? And then to recognize that everybody else is doing the same thing. And in that connection, we help each other understand. So it's not just, I have to, recognize an outside source. It's knowing that I'm already within that outside source. We all are, that there really isn't an outside source. So if we're all traveling together, right, as oneness, but my goodness, your aspect of oneness is the left eye, and my aspect of oneness,
Using
right?
that analogy, right? Yeah.
Well, how do I merge that together? And then how do I also um, shift awareness to understand that somebody else has the perception behind, right?
Mm.
And that in that space of connection, I can be a part of that, consciously or unconsciously. And anything that I am realizing and take on and work with gets put into that for somebody else to connect with as well in some fashion. Um, we just I It's called oh my goodness, watch me lose the word. I think it's morphic resonance. I'm part of a group from the Inner Quest. They're a beautiful community that Simon James and Brian Robertson are the head of. And they have an online group called Sophia. And within that Sophia group, we do read we read 3 or 4 books a year and then discuss that. And the book we just most recently read was called Morphic Resonance, if I'm pronouncing it right. And amazing in that there's scientific research in that book that shows how connected we are as universe, not just as people, but the universe itself. So it talks about how when crystals start growing in a certain fashion on one part of the world in one lab, all of a sudden, you know, the same time frame on another part of the world, scientists are finding that same exact thing. It's like the knowledge moves, right? The knowledge is there. Once it starts, then it's spread around. You know, we all hear and I think it was National Geographic had a lot of things about animals, or, you know, particularly monkeys or turtles or even birds that learn how to do things in one area of the world. And then the scientists are like, oh, that's cool how they learned how to do that. And then, like, just within days on another part of the world, they're like, well, how did they learn that so fast if these ones just learned it? Well, it's in, and then like Greg Braden calls it the divine matrix. The book I just
Okay.
read with the
Okay.
Sophie calls it the morphic resonance. You know, the physicists do the particle, where they separate the particles, and then they adjust the particle on this side that's 14 miles away from the particle on the other side, and the particles react even though you're only doing something to one. You know, all of these things show us scientifically how connected we are energetically, you know, and then to know that that is spirit, that is the oneness that we're a part of, and how stinking connected we really, really are. So if I'm working on me and I'm working on my quote mediumship, right, and my connection and my communication and my interpretation, then all of that feeds into my entire life on how integral I am in interpreting my life, you know, or vice versa, how integral I am in taking care of myself physically, and my life and what I'm reading and learning moves into, well, while I'm communicating with the non-physical, how I'm interpreting that more clearly. You know, it goes hand in hand. And then to know that anything I do with me and in that aspect, even if I don't understand it, or even if I don't see it directly, it is rippling out. Somebody someplace is is being affected by that or can learn from that, or something. If any of that makes sense.
It does. It helps us understand that it gives validation for the fact that when we say as a medium, you're never alone.
Yeah,
There's a lot of truth to it, not just in terms of the spirit world, but in terms of each other, right?
exactly.
That
It's
we
like, how
are,
individual are we really? I mean, yes, I'm individual. Yes, I have a life. Yes, I have my own children. Yes, I have my own house. Yes, I have my own memories. And yet, how individual is that in the whole story? I mean, we're talking about a whole universe or universes of spirit,
yeah,
right? That are connected, and we play this little part, but it's a huge part as well, you know, because in that connection, if we're connected to this grand mission of love, trying to understand what love really is, and we are helping understand what that is in a real time. I mean, how amazing is that? And then so that's why mediumship is so important, because that's really the basis. It's so much more
yeah.
than, you know, it's their connection to everything.
I know when I've tried to explain to people my experience as a medium, I feel really immersed, like I'm in a swimming pool, right? And I know you probably know this as well. When we're giving one particle of the message, like one topic, or we're talking, there's also something else running as well simultaneously, right? It's like your attentions are split if you're going to individuate it like that. But really, it's all running. It feels like it's all running at the same time. And I like to explain that it's like I'm in a swimming pool and there are things over here, things over there, or even in a room, right? You look around your room and you're like, okay, I know there's a plaque on the wall. I know there's a picture behind me, but I'm not focused on those things right now. I'm focused on looking at you and talking to you. But for a split second, I literally split and brought my awareness that it was there and pulled it back. So when you're talking about, I'm trying to make sense of basically, or trying to coalesce what you just said too. Like we're all around everything. We're completely immersed, but at one moment we are reaching out to focus on one individuation of the oneness. Would that be kind of where, am I
Yeah, or our
understanding what you're saying?
interpretation of whatever that is. I started using the words physical and non-physical because instead of spirit person or this, because I feel like, and this has taken quite a while for me to and bear with me here, because this is actually, we talked about writing books, and this is the awareness I'm trying to get into actual words, is
Ah,
that when we shift into mediumship, when we shift into that awareness, yes, there's memories, there's personality, there's emotions, right? But I feel like instead of little balls of light that we're connecting to, like let's talk about, I don't know, let's talk about my grandpa. I know somebody's connecting in spirit and they're like, oh, I I know I'm aware of your grandpa. I'm like, oh, that's great. And a lot of times, especially I know when I started, it was like, oh, grandpa's this little ball of light. I'm gonna blend with grandpa. And then there's information to say that that's grandpa, right? For me now, it feels more like we're in this big, huge, how the ocean, the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans have like streams of current in them, like
mm-hmm,
real life streams of current. Okay, that's a thing, right? So
mm-hmm.
I feel like if the metaphor is spirit is the ocean, which we've heard that a lot, that metaphor that spirit's ocean, and we are both the drop and the ocean. We hear that's and yes, but also I feel like there are streams within the ocean, and that the consciousness, the non-physical consciousnesses, right? The individuals, the 7 billion that are now not physical, right? Not only is that information from that life there, but the information that's being blended with the whole ocean is also there. So it's not just a little tight ball, but it's a stream. So that the stream of consciousness within the grand consciousness. So when we move into that ocean, right, when we become aware of the ocean in the connection moment, um, we don't only just have that information about whatever personality, but if they're running through a stream of the ocean, you have everything that they've been able to pick up and are blending with themselves, right? Which makes it so much more rich and so much more wide and not boxed in. I think in order for us to understand what that means for us to be in oneness, we have placed boxes,
Mm-hmm.
information, and that's normal. That's a normal human thing, right? But to know that you can stand up on top of that box and see around all the other boxes and maybe even see inside, or oh my goodness, how about this? You could like get up and walk around the boxes and look in them. Or you could take some scissors and cut the boxes apart and know that they're just structures to make sure that we receive information in an orderly fashion, because that's what our human brains think. And to know that we really don't need that. The more we become in alignment with that, that the information, yes, grandpa's in that stream, right? But grandpa is so much more than his shoe size and what candy he gave me and what he liked to drink on Friday night and his job. There's so much more. And there's so much more that can be accessed for healing for each other so that the rest of us can move up and forward into that alignment with who we really are as aspects of spirit.
said. I love that. Yeah. As you're talking, it makes total sense from an experiential standpoint. Absolutely. Because the physical is a container, isn't it? The container is that box that you're talking about. Our body is that box. So when we release the body, all possibilities open up again to fall into that stream that you're talking about. Yeah. Very beautiful. Yeah. It's hard to put in words though, isn't it?
Very hard to put in words. That's why I think for the classes that I tried to shape for the online ones that are coming up, it's the idea that we can immerse in that and know what that is for ourselves. Because the more we understand ourself and where we're at and how we're interpreting and all that, the more the rest of that comes into view, or the more we're able to align with it. And then here's the next bit. Once we do that, it's not done, because that's where we understand right now. And now the job is, how do we expand that and grow it into the next phase of perception, to keep getting, farther and farther out. It's kind of like uh Ken Wilber. I love Ken Wilber. He's just, I can't say enough about what I've learned by reading his work and his understanding of how we grow and move and integrate. He calls it transcending and including. So we not only are we moving up and expanding our awareness, but we're including everything that we did before. But when we include it, it's healed, it's more in alignment than what we understood before. We refine the perception so that it can move up with us. So like for example, when I was about 18, I had friends that lived in an off-campus setting. That was an old building with lots of history. I mean, like, it had gone through all kinds of incarnations of all kinds of things. And they're like, we want to take you around and show you. Well, my friends like to do stuff to me because they understood more than I did, that I reacted to the world around me. It was an interesting, so we're like, we're going to take you around. And there was this one place in the building where I literally had like an anxiety or panic attack. They picked me up off the floor and took me outside. Now, these friends were both born again Christian friends, and their take on my experience was, she knows that there's evil there, because they knew the history of the building. And in that
Right.
spot, somebody had taken their own life, and somebody else on that same spot had had some kind of overdose experience. Right. So these things had happened in the building. So at 18, listening to my friends is like, I'm aware of when there's evil, and I'm that struck by it that I fall down. And so I could stay with that interpretation my entire life, right? Which people do, and that's all. I mean, people, whatever their path is. But for me, over time, it was, okay, so I'm not claustrophobic the way some people try to interpret that experience, because it was a closed in kind of area. And there's not evil there, but I am somebody that can be aware of the energies and the history of a place, and stuff did totally happen there, right? And my body did not have a frame of reference to interpret it when I was 18 years old. I understand now that we walk through energy all the time. And as soon as I started to understand things like that, my claustrophobia that happened a lot started not to happen, because I could say, oh, I understand my body is reacting to something that it doesn't understand. So it's telling me that there's some kind of danger because it doesn't understand it. When there's no danger, it's just my physicalness trying to understand what's happening in the area. Does that make sense? It's kind of like
Makes perfect
feeling the
sense.
saber-toothed tiger, and running the other way. It's the same, your body reacts. So I'm able to take that experience and, in Ken Wilber's language, transcend it, grow it up, but also include it in my experience. Now, I don't ditch it and say, oh, I was just dumb for thinking that. I'm like, that was a really neat experience for me, right? But now I can interpret it in a way that's very healthy.
Right. The thought that went through my head when I went like this, when you said grow it up, it's like a child who encounters something that they just don't, they can't metabolize it, just like you mentioned, right? Like you just couldn't handle it. And then once the wisdom is there and the knowledge is there of what it is, and that it, and the reference point, which comes from the parent in that, you know,
Exactly.
illustration, then it can change everything for that
It
child.
does. It's
Yeah.
knowing that we're not the victim of anything in the world. If we are an aspect of spirit, there's no victimhood. There's
Yeah.
simply sometimes an ignorance and understanding.
Perfect sense. Yeah. And that's what we see. And if we can understand that as a compassionate person in service for others, then we can look at their behavior or their circumstance or their concerns, and we can bring that maybe educational point or that piece of information from spirit that will help them take that and work with it in a way that's healing for them, right?
Exactly. Or at the very least, hold the space for it,
Yeah.
for wherever they're at in the moment, and know that they're heard, right? And then there is something very, very awesome about that, that to not tell somebody they're bonkers or out of their mind or whatever, but
Yeah.
to just listen to where they're at and hold complete space for it. I've heard it up. Okay, so something that you might not know is I'm actually on a prayer minister, a healing minister through Unity Worldwide Ministries now, and I work the third shift on the phone lines. So these people, anybody, they call in, anybody that needs prayer or whatever, and it's all over the map. On you hear the perception that somebody has of their relationship with God, with spirit, with universe, in the wording that they're using for the prayer,
Right.
right? So it's not my job to say in that moment, well, you know what? No, God can't just give you whatever because you've been a good girl, you know? But I can use wording that is in the unity speak, it's called affirmative wording or oneness wording, that recognizes that we are the power of the spirit in that moment. Now, whether it's totally soaked in at that moment or not, that's not for me, right? But to hold that healing space and use the words that are not in victimhood, it has something, you know, whether it's just in the energy and in the calming of the moment for them, or whether they take that on later in some kind of, process for themselves, that the wording is more expansive than maybe what they came to the prayer with themselves. Does that make sense?
Does. And it's interesting because the power of words is something as a medium that we need to be very conscious of.
Exactly. Exactly. And how we are defining things and
Mhm.
how we define things for ourselves, and to know that even our perspective, even if we've done all this work, does not necessarily mean it's correct or expansive enough. So to always keep that, I don't know if it's humility or integrity, when we are working with other people.
You mentioned earlier the consciousness stream, right?
Mhm.
And so when we're as mediums with others, we're being the medium for spirit. These consciousness streams, when we're having somebody across from us, would you say it's important for us as mediums to adjust our stream to be in the flow with the person in front of us? And again, that comes down to the language overlap as well.
I think it's more important at that moment to be in the stream of the non-physical. Because really, when we're in mediumship, even though somebody comes and says, I need a reading or I want a reading, and even though they put down the money for that, right? And this is something that, I don't know, if I have a gripe at all about mediumship and what's happening in today's mediumship world, it's the understanding that it's not, it's turned into, what's the word when when the client is in charge, or if the person's paying, then they get to say, do you know what I'm
Oh,
saying?
the customer's always right, that phrase?
Yeah, something like that, that the customer always knows what's going on, and you know, in a and that's not always right. So I wouldn't go to the dentist and tell the dentist how to, you know what I mean? I don't have that training. And I wouldn't, do you see what I mean? I don't, it's not, it's turned into sometimes a commodity that I got to go buy. And then if I don't get exactly what I think is necessary, then, but if we are integrity as mediums in that space, we are in the stream of consciousness and non-physicalness, right? And that stream will allow for the recognition of what healing is necessary in the moment, because no matter what, that's what we're there for. We're there for the healing from the perspective of the non-physical, not from the perspective of the physical.
Right. Not for the ego's needs and wants and desires and what someone has, diagrammed for themselves as being an outcome that they want to achieve. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. So if, and we all run hot and cold and better or worse on different days, but if we
Yes.
have in our mind and our hearts that it's healing in the moment and that's healing from the non-physical perspective, right? Then that's what we need. Now, that doesn't mean that we're not aware of our person in front of us, because sometimes maybe what's really happening is they need to be there and just sit with that because of grief, or maybe they need to speak. Sometimes as mediums, or sometimes in a session, my job is to hold that space open for the stream to be present for them without a lot of words. And I don't know that we often think about that. We don't have enough grief training for our mediums, or I don't know that, right? And I've taken myself to extra lots, extra grief training, because I know when well, 12, I don't, it's been a while now, 2012, my husband passed, right? And there were a lot of well-meaning mediums that would say a lot of things that were not helpful, right? Because of what their perspective was on what was necessary for some kind of healing, right? So it would be things like, well, he's okay. Or, you know what, I can hear him now and he wants to tell you. I'm like, well, did I ask you, first of all? And and second, you see what I mean? It's like when we get so excited that we are able to recognize and interpret, right, without really focusing on the healing aspect sometimes, right? It's way more than the mechanics. It's way more than that. It's what's necessary for healing in the moment, right? Now, and that really, really became focused for me when I was dealing with, again, a lot of lovely, well-meaning mediums. It's not that they didn't mean well, right? But the training and the understanding of what's happening with a person in grief was not there. So when the contact or the information would come, right, there was no awareness of how that stream was merging with the stream of the person in front of them. And I think that's where the awareness, it's like, yes, we pay attention to the stream from the non-physical, but then are we aware enough to feel where that stream is going in the moment, right? And do we need to stop talking and just hold space for that stream to move? Are we really finding the right words, or are we choosing words that we think would make us feel better?
Right. That personal adjustment, which is what I was asking you about, but it's not up to us to adjust personally. It's up to us to be as present as possible and
Present, yeah, and interpret as clearly as possible.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have a question about what we just talked about here in the context of platform mediumship. So if you're sitting one-to-one with a person and you have this understanding they're going through this grievous, but also grief process, while you're sitting with them, you can let the stream support and nurture that person, holding space for them. Now, when we get into platform, especially in places like Lilydale, we are more about how fast can you get so many messages out in so much amount of time. And other disciplines, they give you a lot of time to do that. So how have you understood as a platform medium to bring that quality into a platform circumstance?
It's a really good question because platform for me is a little bit of a different beast than
Okay.
one-on-one.
Yeah.
Okay. So platform, yes, it's healing. I don't want to lose the healing aspect, but it's also a recognition of what is possible in the healing and what can we show for a larger group. So even though it's one communicator, maybe two communicators and one sitter, right? Or
Mhm.
whoever's in the audience that is the recipient of that. The energy and the experience is for everybody that is there, right? So that energy supports what's happening in the moment. Yeah. So it becomes much more than, I just have this information for you, right? It's the awareness that what's coming through, yes, it is for that person, but on a grander level or on a level that's maybe we don't quite understand as human, there's a whole group of people there that are in that healing moment together, listening to that, supporting that, being affected by it, feeling that, whatever it is. So does that make sense?
Totally does. Yes.
Yeah. So, and I know different places have, because I've worked at LILYDALE platform where they're like, you need to do 3 within 7 minutes. And then I've been in other ones where they're like, well, you have 7 minutes to complete one contact, right? Now, at the Lilydale atmosphere, you're trying to show what's possible a lot of different ways to a lot of people in a short amount of time.
Correct. You're trying
So
to
I
reach
don't
it.
know that either one of them is more right or more wrong,
Mhm.
right? As long as we understand that it's number one, it's not a show, right? It's not a show. For me, it's not a show. Right?
Yeah.
Um, and I tend to operate and platform in places that are smaller. So I always leave room for a Q&A after. So if there is a not under, because in a platform space, you have people that have never seen mediumship before.
Mhm.
They might be there in extreme grief and want to know why their person didn't show up through you to talk to them, right? There might be people that are like, prove it to me now. You have all of this going on in the energy, and yet it's all supporting what's happening. So for me, I always leave space. Again, I can do this because I'm working in smaller arenas, which I don't mind because there's that space to say, okay, this is what's really happening, at least from my perspective to you. Do you have a question? Were you on, to have that conversation around it with whoever's present. And again, to know that the information, because I think platforms started off now, and I could be totally off here, but historically was a way to prove continuity of life,
I
or
think
not
it did.
prove because we can't prove anything, but to demonstrate that there is this continuity of information, right? So you would have, that was the platform, was to share continuity of life. So I still hold on to that, but I also think that in this, where we are at as a culture, is we don't need so much anymore, this understanding of continuity of life, that there seems to be a really strong recognition. Now, there's all kinds of varying ideas about what that means exactly, but but this idea that there is more
Yes.
doesn't seem to be in dispute. So then it becomes, well, what is most necessary in the moment? Again, I don't have any other better word than healing, for that presence to be known in whatever way. And again, and then the audience, the people that are there, take it on in whatever way they need to. Again, it's all perception, whatever way they need to at the moment.
And even though you're under that pressure in certain situations to get a certain amount done in a certain amount of time, you're still motivated by being in the stream of spirit, not in the stream of the people that are waiting there for some kind of feedback.
Exactly. Because if I shift to the non-physical, if any of us do, that information is there on what's needed, right? We don't have to try to figure it out, because in that oneness, it is all there. And there's some kind of, and again, I don't pretend to understand how it happens, but for me, it's like, what is most necessary to rise to the surface that I am equipped to move forward? Because I don't know that all mediums are equipped for all situations to move that forward, which is neat. One of the reasons I like to work with other mediums on platform is because that's the best part for me. One, we work so different. We each have a different way of moving into that space and to speaking and recognizing. So people get to see that they're allowed to have their own experience because the mediums are having their own experience, and maybe the medium I'm working with is way more equipped to handle this one, and they pick that awareness up, and I'm more equipped to handle this other one for whatever reason, whether it's our temperament or our background or, whatever, so that you're able to facilitate what rises to the surface, that's most necessary.
I always find it fascinating when two mediums that work differently will work together with one spirit communicator. So that they'll team up, right? And then you'll get that depth that you're talking about, where it's still the same communicator the communicator coming through, and then the two mediums will give it as their stream of consciousness and their equipment, or they're being equipped to bring that information forward. And you can see that difference subtly, but the information is still connected back to an obvious spirit source.
Yeah, I mean, just think about us. If we go someplace, I don't know, let we go and there's a group of people that we're meeting up with, we're going to have some information for one person, and then we go over and sit with another person, and it's a totally different conversation. I mean, so it makes sense in person.
Right, but you're still you each time you go over there, right?
Exactly. Maybe this person I talk all about my kids, and this other one I talk about how I drove someplace that day. Whatever it is, but
Mhm.
yeah.
There's a continuity of who you are. And maybe that's the continuity that is most important to focus on these days, is the continuity of the spirit we're speaking with. Not the
Exactly.
continuity of life, but rather what is the continuity of information they're bringing us.
Exactly. The personality, what memories are being brought forward? What's the emotion behind the memories? Um, what was the connection that you had with this person? And sometimes I think sitters, people that go for the reading, struggle when it might not be direct conversation in quotes to them. I find that those are because part of I'm finding part of my job is to help those that aren't studying this to understand what's really happening, because they might go to one medium and that medium's like, oh, this person is saying this to you, and I'm hearing this, and this is happening, and this is what's going on in your life, and it feels like a conversation, right? And you go to another medium and it's like, okay, so I'm really aware that uh I'm gonna make something up, that they have a granddaughter, that the granddaughter just had some kind of event, was skating, and they did really well, and there's so much pride there, and and they're like, well, what about me? Well, you get to be this beautiful vessel to hear this person be very proud of their granddaughter.
Mm-hmm.
Which is amazing to know that there's still that love connection there. I think sometimes we get a little bent out of shape when we're the sitter, and that personality is such that it comes through in that way. Does that make sense?
It does, yes. I was going to say, I had an example once where a woman, I was bringing her husband through, and we got the identification, and then there was crickets. There was nothing after that he gave me, but I felt his presence was still with us. And so I just let her know. I said, he's still with us. We've identified he's here. She goes, well, what does he want to say to me? I said, he's not delivering any more information to me to share with you. And I was just being honest as what was happening, but I said, his love is still with us. I mean, his presence is still with us. And she took her fist and smashed on the table because she was hurt and frustrated that, again, he wasn't talking to her. And my heart went out to her. It also went out to him. And being in the middle of that, my heart was knowing that I couldn't say much. This was not about, me, the medium. And, I had to stay with the stream, that he was present. And this was something she had to maybe move into. But who am I to say?
Yeah. And who are we to say that that wasn't his personality here anyway?
And that's what it sounds like from what
That
she
he
said.
was a quiet presence here and he's always going to be
Something for her to deal with, nothing for,
that.
yeah.
Exactly. We all take on what's happening around us, and if there's anything I try to get through to people that I feel that I know has helped me, is that we are not the victim, right? It doesn't mean that bad stuff doesn't happen. That's not what I mean. It doesn't mean that, we don't have experiences where people were just atrocious. That's a different kind of victim. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's a real victim.
I don't want to like diminish
Yeah.
that, but to know that once those events happen, right? And once things, that we don't have to stay there energetically, and especially when we're working with the non-physical, we're not being told to do things. We're not being told we're good or bad, or that we have to get something accomplished. Our spirit people aren't mad at us. They don't try to make us do certain things, none of that. It's a total connection and sharing of love and energy, right? And yeah, human things, because we don't understand, there's garbage that happens, right? But part of the healing is to understand that we aren't put down by the universe, and I don't know if you've ever read any of the memoirs that have come out the last 20 years from the people that were in the concentration camps. There seems to be quite a few lately. So I don't know if it's because they were getting towards end of life and they're like, it's finally time for me to share, or, unfortunately, I can't come up with a title of just one right now, but the collective of them that
Right.
there wasn't one that I read that was like, I need to hold a grudge. There wasn't one. They were all like, I understand now that this, is part of a greater whole, for not for me to have a lesson, but for all of us to make choices and to understand. And even in the midst of the crud, they would talk about how there was one story, and again, forgive me that I'm not remembering the names right now, but there's one story where the sisters were at concentration camp. They weren't Jewish, but they had helped the Jewish people, right? So they were still taken to camp. And the one night they blessed the bed bugs and the fleas. And it sounds weird, but they went through and they were like, we need to still bless our surroundings. So and there was a memory of them sitting down in a small group in this place and blessing the bed bugs and the fleas, offering that this was their space and whatever. And when what they found was, and what they recognized was, soon after they made that recognition themselves to find something in their space to bless, even it was icky, the the guards started checking on them less and less while they were in that space. And then what they found out was it was because the bed bugs and the fleas, and the guards didn't want to be near them, the bed bugs and the fleas. So the bed bugs and the fleas ended up being their protection in order to have conversation with each other, to support each other, to have some prayer time, meditation time in their. So even they're like, find the silver lining someplace, because there always is some, even in something as atrocious as having to live in and around bed bugs and fleas. And those stories came out of that atrocious experience. I don't know. And for me, reading that, there wasn't one book I read that held a grudge, and not all of them got there at an early time. I mean, some of this was life work, but to know that the universe was not against them, that it was a lack of our connection to the universe and our humanity, not the universe itself.
Fascinating. And it really says much with that story that was a real story, that we often assume that something is negative when in fact it could actually be working in our favor. And so it really says something about fear as well, because we tend to project forward something we're afraid of, or we jump to the conclusion or react right away to something that we think is going to be threatening and or fearful, when in fact, in the case of the bed bugs, maybe that's actually going to help us, and we just don't have the intelligence, scope, or depth or breadth to understand how.
Exactly. Or anxiety with anything. It's like, what my youngest, I said, it's a good thing I know you sometimes, because he's working through not being such an anxious personality. And he recently had a meet. He's a competitive diver in high school, and which is a whole other story, but
Good for him.
But first, the anxiety to get over to even be able to dive for this child is because this is a child that would literally not get on roller coasters, or if you got him on one, would pass out, because that's how much of the anxiety was around that kind of activity. And now he's jumping off a board and doing a flip. It's amazing what we can, move ourselves through. But then the anxiety of going to a competition, right? When they're none of my children are competition oriented. It's just not, it's not something that's in them. But to know that he wants to do well and he wants to do this, and so the anxiety comes out as just being a nasty, icky person sometimes. It's like for an hour before and getting in the car and driving and I'm like, all right, do we need to take a breath? Are we just anxious about what's going to happen? And then he's like, yeah, and then he can talk about, right? But to get to the point for ourselves, now this is a teenager, so but a lot of us as adults are still trying to get a handle on what are our emotions really telling us, or what emotion are we really, really having? Is it really fear? Or are we anxious that we think someone's going to say something to us because of the way we do the thing? Is it is it really fear, or do we not feel worthy in the moment? And it could be fear, but then what is it exactly that we're afraid of? And then what choices do we need to make in order to tackle that? And maybe sometimes the choice is, I'm going to stay home today because, oh, like today it's snowing like crazy balls. It's -6 degrees. It's good thing that I get to work from home. So grateful that I can do this
Yeah.
home, and I fear sometimes driving in this kind of weather. So what's my choice sometimes? My choice is sit on my butt, and whatever I needed to drive to, unless it's something like my kids, it can wait, but those are choices I make because of that kind of fear. It's like, but I had to decide that's really what I'm afraid of, right? It's not something else, it's
So
that.
you're not a victim of the weather. You're choosing to stay home because you feel more comfortable at home.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's fascinating. We do things where we project onto someone else what we think they're going to think about us, and then create a fear around it, and then create the behavior that goes with that. And so that expectation, whether it's negative or positive, influences everything we're doing and what and how we behave with other people.
Exactly, exactly. I got certified in a system called quantum living that actually looks at this stuff. I didn't
Yeah.
expect to talk about that, but we're there.
Oh,
So
I'm glad because I'd seen that in your
yeah,
information.
and it really is a way for us to get a handle on ourselves, and it's a version of shadow work. I know a lot of people have heard that word, shadow work, but shadow work really is what's inside of us. What did we take on? What, and again, not that there aren't people that really had bad things happen to them, and that's a form of being a victim, right? I don't want to dismiss that. But there's a lot of things that, for whatever reason, we've made the story up for ourselves, right? Based on what's happened around us. So the example I use for me is when I was about 8, 10 years old. Um, I can remember my aunt cleaning out her place like crazy. Her children had brought home nits, bugs from
Mhm.
school.
Yeah.
Okay.
Light. Yeah.
Lice, thank you. And when that happens, you clean everything, you get the medicine for the head, it's just something we have to work through. I
Right.
was in the because we weren't going in the house, but we were like taking the garbage bags that she would set outside and making sure they were safe and stuff like that. And the adults around me at the time, some of them were having conversations like, I can't believe she can't handle her life and her kids. Oh my goodness, what can't, blah, blah, blah. You know, well, I was 8, 10 years old listening to adults dish, this way about what's happening in my aunt's house and with her children. Well, we all know somebody. I mean, every year in a school classroom, something happens. I know that now. And I don't know that I even thought about that instance at all until about 2 years ago when I'm cleaning my kitchen, right? And doing like a deep clean where you pull out things and you do the cupboards and, all this stuff.
Get the
And there was,
toothbrush in the corner.
yeah, and there's a nest of bugs inside the one cupboard. And all of a sudden I felt inadequate. I'm such a bad housekeeper. I'm a bad mom. How could I let this happen? And I get it all cleaned up. And then I'm like, okay, do your own training. Do what you tell other people to do. So I sit with it, and then, you go through the feelings. What is it? Well, I'm not feeling worthy right now. I feel like I've totally just messed up. How could I let this happen? My kids are right there, blah, 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 blah. Here, and then when I'm sitting with it more, I remembered that incident from when I was 8 or 10. I took on
Oh, yes, you
eight,
did.
10 years old because of what was around me and what adults were saying, that
Mhm.
if you have bugs like that in your house, you're a terrible mom. Right. So I'm like, okay, so that's where that came from. So now I can settle myself down. How do I take care of that? How do I bring that into an alignment? Of course, we finished cleaning the kitchen. That was step one, right? Figure out what's going on, do the appropriate treatment. And then step two for me was having a picnic on the floor in the living room with the TV on with my kids that night for dinner, saying, we, and I know it sounds weird, but for me, that's what I needed to just settle the situation. So it's like, but I had to go find that. I don't know that I would have remembered that in me was planted at 8 years old, that I accepted that this because of what was said around me. And we all have stuff like that.
So quantum living, is that the suggestion then that you recognize that that experience could go in either direction, just like that particle that gets split, and depending on which one you look at, that's what you get?
Yeah,
Is that
and
how
and
you're
then
referencing that?
what story did we tell ourselves? Even if we, again, now I was unconscious in it, right? So it's conscious and unconscious. I don't know if you've heard of Gabor Mate.
No.
Amazing. Look him up. He's
Okay.
an amazing writer and doctor and whatever. He's in his 80s now, but he's still very active in the teaching. And he talks about something similar to this, about the stories we tell ourselves. And he talks about how when he was 1 year old, it was during, uh, he's of Jewish background, and it was during the Holocaust and, all this stuff. And at 1 years old, his mother handed him to somebody that he didn't know very well, and he didn't meet up with his mother again for like another year. So his whole system took on this abandonment, right? Again, he's like 1 year old when this happens, but his system took on all this stuff like abandonment, right? And it followed him. He could see how choices he made and things he did in relationships. And it wasn't until he was in his 50s when he started doing some of this work with his patients and understanding that they were holding on to stories when he was working with them. And then he took it a step further for himself. In the process he did is really similar to what the quantum living is, so I bring it up. And he found that he was still carrying around that abandonment. So he would preemptively do things so that he wouldn't feel abandoned through his entire life. And he's like, he had to remind himself, my mother did that to save my life. She did a really good thing for me, but my system at 1 year old did not understand it that way.
Right, right. The whole body, the chemistry, it was like, where did she go? Where's that smell I'm used to? Where's that
Yeah,
energetic imprint and signature that tells me I'm safe? Yeah.
exactly. So the shadow work isn't finding what's wrong with us that we need to get rid of. It's finding, what did we take on when we didn't have the ability to take it on in any other way?
Right. And so, as spiritual beings, or people wanting to be more spiritual in their lives, and people wanting to do mediumship and be in service of others, what you're telling me is something that I think we all need to pay attention to, which is we need to do our work. We need to do our personal work. We need to recognize where we're coming in with a bias or a filter or an approach or a belief system that will interfere with that stream from spirit as
Ex
we're trying to deliver it.
exactly.
Something about it. Mhm.
Oh, that's exactly. So, mediumship as spiritual practice is everything that we do all the time,
Right.
not just the communication.
Right. I love that. And then we're kind of coming full circle with that, because that's what you said at the beginning, was that mediumship is more than just delivering information and
It
disseminating it to
it
somebody else.
is. It's how we are in alignment with our own source.
Well, I know from doing readings, it's profound, and I know you've probably experienced this too. And you can tell me in a sec. I just had that feeling over and over and over that when I was, that's why I say immersive, when I'm in that space, there is so much more being transmitted to that person beyond the words that come out of my mouth. From however I've understood and however I've channeled, depending on the circumstance, how that quote has come out or how that expression has come out. It's There's so much more going on there. And I don't know about you, but one of my favorite things is watching and being aware of how all of this is doing and affecting and integrating into the other person somehow. And I'm just like, wow, I'm a piece of this, and it's such a beautiful puzzle that we're putting together to get us back to what you had talked about earlier, which is that oneness, right? That interconnected stream of consciousness and love that's always available.
Yeah,
It's beautiful.
e- exactly. Which I know you asked me at the very beginning, I don't even know if we were on camera yet, about the book club, but that's one of the reasons the book club is in place. And I've been trying to figure out a way to integrate that for years, and this year it's just there. But to take different books that maybe we would never have picked up, different perspectives and learning and research from people that maybe we would have never any other time, and to feel what that feels like. Some of it, might feel irritating and itchy, and some of it might be like, oh, I've been trying to find words for that forever. And but to be able to do that and then come together and talk with other people about what they got out of that as well, because what I get out of it might not be anywhere near what you got out of the same reading. I might have loved something and you'd be like, never reading that again. you know
But then your comments on it too, right? This is where people need people, because we can continually to inspire each other. We can continually grow in the softest and most beautiful ways without going to classes, just by integrating and communicating with other people's experiences and being open and receptive to them, to learn to listen. I know that's my word. Oops, excuse me. That's my word for the year, is to just be in this place of listening as much as possible, because it's so easy to get excited about what you want to share. And sometimes when we listen, we realize they're sharing the same thing just differently, or taking you to another place where you can get even more excited about what you want to share.
Exactly. Or perceptions that you never even would have thought about on your own, you
Right.
know, and then think about that in terms of connecting for somebody else in a mediumship area. Well, we can understand all those different personalities in a way that we wouldn't have before. And one of my favorite sources to read about people is, it's called Humans of New York. It's a blog, it's a Facebook page, it's also a book. Brandon, oh, I don't know where my brain is with names today, but it's Brandon something is the author. But you can find it if you type in Humans of New York, I'm sure it'll come up. But he does this amazing thing where he takes a photo. Now, if
Mhm.
the and then he asks somebody, he gets them to talk, and he does exactly what they say. He doesn't embellish it, nothing. It's just exactly whatever they said. You don't always know what the conversation started with and how he got them to say that, but you have a picture, whether it's their face or whether it's just their back or their hands or whatever, and then their exact words. And it is amazing to read how people process their world and what happens with them in that tiny little moment in space, in that presentness with Brandon, and then being able to share it. I think I've learned so much about different people from all over the world because he was able to travel. He's back in New York now doing, there's tons of different people in New York though, so it's all good. But even all over the world, I mean, if you go back further enough in the blog, you
Yeah.
know, and how people perceive their world and their relationships, what they're going through, what they're grateful for, how they talk,
Mm.
it's just amazing, but that
I believe is he on Instagram and Facebook still? Because that's where I come up.
last I knew, yes, yes. And but yeah, the depth and the perceptions and the beauty of people is just amazing. And to get out of our little, because we all have a little box of people that we know and we've grown up with, and and but to move that out and to just to have that awareness of the beauty and all the multiple perceptions is just amazing.
So the book that you're working on this month, they can access now. Is it people can reach out to you on your website to join your book club? Is that how it
Yeah,
works?
I don't sell the books or anything. That's up to them, however they want to do that. Library, whatever people do. But the list of books is there for each month. If you're in the area, we meet at Unity in Edinburgh on a Sunday, and the dates are listed. And on a Wednesday, if you're not in the area, you can pop in online. The only trick for online is you have to register. You have to click the button so that you get the Zoom link.
Okay.
You have you have to take that step
I
to
gotta have the link.
yeah, you have to, because I think we only can get like I don't know, 100 people in the Zoom room or something. So, in order to make sure just
Yes.
you have to click so that you get the Zoom link, and it's just it's not super structured conversation, it's what did we think, what were your perceptions, what did you take from it, not all of that, and a nice sharing. And then not a lot of them, but several of the books I was fortunate enough to listen to the authors this past year or the last couple of years. I'm kind of an author geek, so I'll I'll go listen to lectures and things, so that, you know, I don't know, I want to share that. So one of the ways is to bring their book into the forefront for people and to hear that perception in that fashion.
So February is around the corner, and you're doing the book by Eddie S. Glaude Jr., which
Yeah.
is "We Are the Leaders We Have Been Looking For."
exactly. And
which sounds a really intriguing book.
it is really intriguing, and he was amazing to listen to. He's a brilliant historian and civil rights, and just a beautiful human to listen to. So he's academic in his writing, which I know doesn't always appeal to people, but it's beautiful. It's not a very big book. It's a small book.
Super. Well, this has been awesome. I've been enjoying this tremendously, Jen. Thank you
I
for
guess
showing up for
we
today.
landed an hour.
I know. It's like, whoa. It's like we probably have to stop at some point.
Thank you so much, Kathleen.
Oh, you're welcome. The only thing I want to close on here with you, unless you have something else you want to add, of course, we can do both of those things because, you know, our time is our time. We can decide how long this goes. But you haven't mentioned, we haven't mentioned the Bolts of Love, which is something that you've contributed immensely to over the years, and you offer programs, etc. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the Bolts of Love?
Bolts of Love started, oh my goodness, we are in our 11th year. Yeah, I know it's amazing. It started because honestly, because I was super frustrated with people. I was having a hard time reconciling how people are not communicating, are not being nice to each other, or even in our quote spiritual settings and institutions. You know, why did it feel like I was back in middle school sometimes? You know, I was having a moment, and I went I had a
Just
conversation.
something wonderful, obviously.
And I was having a conversation with Karen McGrath and Aaron Stoltz. Now, Aaron passed last year.
Oh,
Um,
no.
and yeah, we miss her greatly, but I don't want to like leave her out of this story. Because the two of them, as I'm like, oh my goodness, why can't people be nice? um, they're like, and then Karen told a story about how she had a similar feeling early in her life, and how she sat down and sent love to the people that she wasn't understanding or that felt like they were being mean. And then that turned into kind of a joke that we were going to be like Zeus and throw bolts of love at people
Love it.
to explode it, because sitting in prayer just wasn't enough. So, I mean, that's where the name came from. And then it turned into a way to exchange. So we invited anybody and everybody, everyday people, you know, not like big name speakers, but to share. So we would meet twice a month, and people would share whatever their expertise was, whatever their perception was, and we'd have a conversation about it. It grew to where we were doing demonstrations and holding little classes, and you know, and it's comfortable space to know that there is some place that says you're allowed to ask questions, and know that no question is a dumb question. You're allowed not to know things, right? The people
Mhm.
that are helping and facilitating are allowed not to know all the answers, and that we can share with each other and move it forward together, knowing that we're not all in the same place, but we have a desire to move forward and to better ourselves and the world around us.
It's a very special place.
Yeah, very special people, very special people. So we're actually going to get together later this month, a core group of us that have been together that long, and just say, oh my goodness, it's been 11
Great.
years.
Yeah, celebrate. 11 years, a good spiritual number. 1 1. Love it. Yeah. So this is wonderful. So the book club, if anyone wants to access that, that is listening to our program this far into it, if you want to access that, if you want to access Bolts of Love, it's all on the Bolts of Love website, which I'll have listed below in the show notes. Did you have anything else you wanted to share with everyone before we sign off today?
It's been lovely. Thank you for allowing me to just explore in conversation here. This has been great.
Thank you. I appreciate you. I appreciate all that you do for other people too.
Thank you.
So viewers and listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. And those of you that stayed to the end, bigger love from both of us. We want to thank you for showing up. We'll have another week coming up soon. If you have any questions for Jenn or you want to reach out to her, join the club, take a look at the show notes below. And I wish you all well. I wish you healing. And may you find your spiritual sacredness in every moment. Be well. Bye, Jenn.